Politically, this word Sanatan Dharma has become very controversial. But the word Sanatan is used by Jains, it's used by Buddhists, and it's used by Hindus. Many people don't realize this. See, if you are Hindu, you will say it comes from a Hindu source. If you come from a Christian, you'll say it comes from a Christian source. If you're a Muslim, you'll say it comes from an Islamic source. Everybody thinks that my daddy is strongest. Mythology tells you that everybody has different truths. So my book is trying to help people understand the newer knowledge, not this old, what your uncle knew. I think the young generation should not listen to what the uncles told them.
Our guest today is someone whose books have captivated readers worldwide by decoding the intricate threads of Indian mythology and making it relevant to our modern life. Although he is well known for his books on Hindu deities and epics, on this episode we are going to discuss his new book on Jainism titled Bahubali. Thrilled to have on Buzz by the Bay renowned author and mythologist Devdutt Pattanaik. Hello, Devdutt.
Hi, Anushka.
Thank you for coming on the show and thank you for having us in your home, and I love this wall with your illustrations.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
So these have to do with your book Bahubali.
Yes, I like to illustrate my books because people like to read and they also need a break from reading, and sometimes you want to explain ideas, and I think when you show a picture, like from childhood when you have these Bal Bharati books and the Hindi book, all our textbooks have these diagrams, and I think I'm addicted to that. I like a picture, so I draw it.
And on Bahubali, I read it. Really fascinating. So much I didn't know about Jainism. And as you say in your book, it's an ancient faith, but very little is known about it, right? I mean, and these illustrations are the ones that you put in Bahubali. Maybe if you could explain one or two of them to us, the more significant.
So this, if you can see this, so first of all, Jainism is a very old faith in India. It's as old as Buddhism. Buddhism is more popular because it's spread around the world, and therefore you have the Chinese Buddhism. When you go to Southeast Asia, you see Buddhism. Jainism remained in India, and therefore people don't know much about it. It's part of a trading community. So you know your Gujarati friends and your North Indian friends who are Jain, but you don't know much about them. Let me give you an example of this image. This is a Loka Purusha, it is called. Loka means space and Purusha means being. Yes. And if you look at one side, there is a snake and there is a ladder, and all the snake and ladder games that we play were invented by the Jain Munis to explain karma. How in life you can't control things, but suddenly things can go positive and things can go negative. Paap and Punya concept comes from snake and ladder. And then if you do good things, you go up, and that is Swarga. This is the world of Swarg, and this is where good things have happened, and bad things are Naraka. So this kind of idea really it's there in Hinduism, it's there in Buddhism, it's there in Jainism. Because they were a trading community, they would use financial language. So they will say things like, if you are in debt, then you go into Naraka. And if you clear your debt, you go into Swarg. If you're in credit world, you are in Swarg. And these are the guys who sort of took many of the financial concepts around the world. So through Jainism, we understand about Hinduism, India, and about human life.
Really, really fascinating, this diagram. Actually, I was going to discuss the Jain concept of karma a little later on and compare it to the Hindu idea of karma. So I will come to that. But firstly, your book starts with King Rishabh, who rediscovered Jainism, right? And his story was fascinating. I didn't know it. And about his two sons, Bahubali and Bharat.
Yes.
It's a wonderful story. Could you narrate that to us?
So you see, the reason these stories are important is, nowadays this, politically this word Sanatan Dharma has become very controversial. But the word Sanatan is used by Jains, it's used by Buddhists, and it's used by Hindus. Many people don't realize this. This word Sanatan is used by people who believe in rebirth. Right? And they believe that this wisdom in India, so the Hindus will say the Ved Sanatan hai. That means the Vedic knowledge is eternal. The Jains will say Jinnavani is eternal, Sanatan. It's always there, and it comes and goes. Like the wise people will come, they'll discover it and share it with us. They'll come and discover it and share it with us. And we forget it. Maybe we forget it because we don't need it. When we need it, it'll come in the form of wise man. And in this yug, it came first with a man called Rishabh. And Rishabh had 2 sons, and he had 100 sons and all that, but of these 2 are very prominent. One is Bharat, and Bharat becomes the first emperor of India, Chakravarti, hence India is called Bharat.
Okay.
So suddenly you see these words like Sanatan, which we use in politics, is really has Jain roots, which very few people know about. And I feel very sad that we overlook the Jain things which is there. Bahubali is his brother who chooses non-violence. Bahubali and Bharat fight over land and property, and Bahubali at one point says, "Hey, this is not right. I don't want to fight," and he becomes a monk. He becomes a Jain monk. And it's important because when we say Bahubali, we think of a Bollywood film, right, called Bahubali, which is a very violent film. And I decided to write the book Bahubali because I've thought that it became such a super hit that people remember the violent Bahubali.
Okay.
If you do a Google search with Bahubali, you'll get a violent Bollywood film. You won't get the non-violent sage who has been around for 2000 years. This is not healthy for our country.
Right. So Rishabh was the first Tirthankara.
First Tirthankar. The word is Tirthankar that they use. Basically, it means a great teacher or a sage or the supreme sage, like the highest sage. But it has a metaphorical meaning that someone who takes you across. Dunya ke taam jham se tumko nikal ke, he takes you to the other shore. So from our material world, who takes us to the spiritual world. So that's the meaning of the word Tirthankar. So these are ideas I love, and I like to share it with young people because I think when they go through mental health issues and all the problems that we have, I think spirituality helps you calm down, center yourself.
It does, absolutely. And mental health is a very important topic these days, right? And there are so many solutions for it from our own spiritual texts, Hinduism, Jainism, and that's wonderful that you draw these references in your book. So if you can just give us an idea, in which era did Rishabh Dev live?
So Rishabh Dev is supposed to have lived over 1 million years ago, like that kind of things. And he lived for 10 raised to the power of something else. So it's a way of explaining कि बहुत पुराने ज़माने में ये थे, and that knowledge came. He was the first Tirthankar, after which there are 20 Tirthankars. And the last Tirthankar, who is Mahavir, is a contemporary of Buddha.
Okay.
Older contemporary. So he lived around 2,500 years ago.
So, going back a bit, you said the name Bharat has its origins in Jainism. That could be a bit of a contrarian view, right? Many believe it's Puranic origins or from the Rig Veda.
See, if you are Hindu, you will say it comes from a Hindu source. If you come from a Christian, you'll say it comes from a Christian source. If you're a Muslim, you'll say it comes from an Islamic source. Everybody thinks that my daddy is strongest. So everybody has this view that my truth is the truth. And mythology tells you that everybody has different truths. Listen to other people. If you want to have a good life, don't say your truth is the only truth. Listen to other people. In the Hindu Purans, Rishabh Dev is part of the Hindu Puranic scriptures. Rishabh is part, even Buddha is considered to be part of Hinduism. But if you read the Buddhist texts, they don't agree. The Jain texts don't agree. So whose truth is the truth? If you insist that your truth is the truth, then you will have vivad. You will have quarrels. And then you will have a TV show where everybody is screaming and shouting. You will get great TRP ratings, but no peace of mind. So if a Jain believes that the name Bharat comes from the king Bharat Chakravarti, that's his truth. If a Hindu believes it comes from a Vedic scripture, because in Vedas there is Bharat, in Puranas there is Bharat, in Ramayana there is a Bharat, there are so many Bharats. In Mahabharat there is a Bharat.
Yes.
So which Bharat are we talking about? And that's what makes India great, right? We are a plural country, we have diverse ideas. And I think when we respect other people's truth, we bring people together.
But you're of the conviction that it's the origin is the name originates in Jainism.
In the Jain book, it is in
the Jain
book.
Okay.
If it was a Hindu book, I would write the Hindu thing.
All right.
If it's a Christian book, I would write the Christian thing.
Interesting, very interesting. So there's a concept which you explain, Jina, in Jainism, right? Someone who's victorious over their own.
Jinn.
Jinn. Okay.
So unfortunately, when you say jinn in Hindi, it sounds like Aladdin and the jinns and DJ Iron. But jinn is someone who is a conqueror. So the Jains would use typical words which suggest like conqueror, but they refer to spiritual conquest.
Right.
So a jinn is someone who conquers the mind. So they'll say who is greater, one who conquers the world or who conquers the mind. Okay. He who conquers the world is a Veer. He who conquers the mind is a Mahavir.
Wow.
Like I always tell people when I meet, a rich and powerful person, I said, can you create an app to reduce jealousy.
Oh.
So I will give you an open challenge to Silicon Valley and all the genius IIT, IIM people, ki make me an app that reduces jealousy. You can't do that. So then you are solving problems that don't need to be solved. Instead of solving problems that need to be solved. Because if you reduce jealousy, the problems of life will reduce dramatically. But you can't create that app, can you? But you can create apps that increase jealousy. Because I'll go to Facebook, I'll go to Instagram, and I'll see my friends having apparently a better life than me. And then I'm feeling very jealous, and I'm feeling insecure, and I'm feeling angry. That you can create. You can always create a negative app. You can't create a positive app.
Right.
So these scriptures like this will look at the words 2,500 years ago, maybe 10,000 years ago, maybe 1,000,000 years ago. People said, you know what? Defeating someone in a battlefield, in a boxing match, in a war, in a battlefield is easy. But defeating your own mind, your own anger, your own jealousy, your own hatred is not that easy.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's the same concepts in Hinduism, right? I mean, merger with the supreme consciousness, that is the ultimate goal, right? And to overcome the barriers in your own mind, or to, yes, transcend that level. So, now Jainism is commonly thought to have emerged from Hinduism, right? And it was, they say that it was a reaction to Vedic ritualism. But in your book, you have mentioned that there is evidence that it could be pre-Vedic, right? That the concept of rebirth and liberation rose independently from the eastern Gangetic plains. Why is it that people have seen it as a reaction to Hinduism?
See, most of the writers who say that are Hindus. When Hindu writers write, they tend to privilege Hinduism over other things. And that's okay. So long as you start reading Jain authors and you start reading other authors. And now scholars are realizing that the Vedic culture was restricted to the Gangetic plain, the oldest form. So between 1500 BC and 500 BC, you find Vedic culture really in the region that we now call Uttarakhand, Uttar Pradesh.
Yes.
This place is where the Vedic culture thrives. It starts in Punjab, Haryana area, goes up to Uttaranchal, Uttarakhand, and then Uttar Pradesh, but does not really cross the Gandak river. It doesn't go to Bihar.
Right.
What we call Bihar today is where you suddenly have different ideas. Buddhism, Jainism, all of them come from this Bihar region.
Yes.
And therefore you see these two ideas. So it's not that one reacted, because nowhere in the Jainism or Buddhism they say anything. They are just thinking differently. They are thinking about rebirth. They are talking about trap, the sansara. These ideas are not there in the early Vedic scriptures. So it seems like as if there are two rivers flowing and they're joining, and then they sort of influence each other. And therefore this old thought that these are part of Hinduism and their reactions, and really this idea came with the British. You know, the British used the Western model to understand India. They said, you know, in the old days the world was pagan, then Christianity comes, then within Christianity there was a split, there was a Catholic Church, and there was a reaction called Protestants. They said, oh, India is also like that.
Okay.
Increasingly, most people believe that Jainism had an independent thing, Vedic had a different thing. They both sort of intermingle. Jainism changes over time, Buddhism changes over time, even Hinduism changes over time. So my book is trying to help people understand the newer knowledge, you know, this old, what your uncle knew. I think the young generation should not listen to what the uncles told them.
So, but you also mention in your book that the seals of the Indus Valley civilization have Jain motifs.
Yes.
Are you the first? I haven't really heard any archaeologists or historians make this assertion.
See, I'll give you a thing. When you went, the Harappa, nobody knows anything about Harappa. Nobody knows anything. It's just like we have these seals, and somebody saw the seal which looked like someone performing yoga. And they said, oh, that's a yogi. Great. And that's Pashupati, they started saying. But then we don't know what the Harappans called this character. But then I started looking at the seal carefully, and I realized there's a rhinoceros over there. There is an elephant over there. There are these seals which show other images, and all these animals are linked to Jain Munis. So why can't it be a Jain seal? And when you say the word Pashupati, which comes from the Vedas, it refers to someone who deals with cattle, not with wild animals. This image has wild animals around it. But we can only guess. So I'm saying, if you're going to guess, why don't you give it a Jain guess?
Okay, so you're saying don't make assumptions, right?
So I'm trying to force people to challenge what the uncle is saying.
what the uncle is saying. Okay, very interesting. So, the fundamental difference between Hinduism and Jainism, is it the absence of a Varna system in Jainism?
Not really. You know, in India, everything has Varna. Caste is everywhere in India, and it's an unfortunate reality. Even whether you're Christian, Muslim, Jain, everywhere caste exists. Jainism does not have the concept of a supreme god, someone who will come to your rescue.
Okay.
कि मुझे कोई रखवाला है, मुझे कोई बचाने वाला है. So you have these images of Vishnu coming and saving his disciple, Shiva coming and saving his disciple. Krishna saying that if there is problems on earth, I will come down on earth as an avatar. So basically, you look to Bhagwan and say that somebody will save me, someone will protect me, someone will take care of me. This idea does not exist. You are on your own. That's why it's called Shramana Parampara.
Okay.
Shram karna padta hai, hard work. Nobody is going to take care of you. Humans have to go through life. They have to, if they live by the Jain code of Ahimsa, Aparigraha, Anekantavad, then they will be free from all suffering. So that's why they do a lot of fasting, they do a lot of meditation.
Very interesting. And I read that in your book, that there's no God. You have to overcome your own ego by yourself. God is not going to help you do that, and that's why it's such an austere religion, and that's why it's very difficult to follow, right? A lot of penance is required.
Yeah.
A lot of austerity is required.
See, the thing is, if you can't follow it, you will come back again in the next life and get another chance. So there's no problem.
You spoke about Ahimsa and a parigraha, and I saw after reading your book, and I've studied the Yoga Sutras independently, and that many central concepts of Jainism are quite similar to Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. Ahimsa as in non-violence, aparigraha, non-greed, non-accumulation. Even the idea of Kaivalya in Jainism is similar to Kaivalya or complete liberation in the Yoga Sutras. So what is the connection, if any? Was Mahavir, did Mahavir and Patanjali exist around the same time? I don't know if you can explain
so
that.
So all these ideas come from what I said, the eastern part of India. Okay. So the region of Pataliputra, which is east of the Gandak river. So if you take a map in front of you and do the Ganga river, and you'll see at one place there's a river called Gandak, and then on that side is what we call today Bihar. That is the place where there's a lot of things happened, new ideas came. The big idea which came from there was rebirth. The big idea which came from there is monasticism. These ideas were not there in the Vedic tradition. They're there. They are there, but in the fringes. You can say 90% of Vedic tradition doesn't have this, 10% has this. Here, 99% only talks about, rebirth, karma, death, liberation, and most importantly, Shramana Parampara, the hermit, not getting married, being celibate, withdrawing from the household. These ideas emerge. So that's why what we call Yoga Sutra and all that. So they really come from this zone. And the problem is Hindus will think it's an Hindu idea, the Jains will say it's a Jain idea, but really it comes from this land. It's what is called a Magadhan idea. Who influenced whom we will never know. So Jains have their own stories, Hindus have their own stories, and I think I enjoy listening to both the stories. I don't try to find out which is right, wrong.
Yes.
I love the stories.
I guess there's no right or wrong, and I was going to come to that, the Jain retelling of the Ramayana. If you could just briefly mention some of the important points in the Jain retelling of the Ramayana.
So the story goes that when Mahavir was giving his lectures, one of these king from the Magadhan region, Shrenika, goes to Mahavir and says, I've read this Ramayana, it doesn't really make sense, the monkeys fighting. How can monkeys fight? And how can a man have 10 heads? So can you please explain? So then Mahavir gives him some stories, and the Jains have said that we have retold these stories, and they are the Jain Ramayans. And so for the first time you hear rational thought in it. For example, they say that actually the Vanars were not monkeys, they were people who lived in the forests who had flags on which the symbol of monkey was there. They say, there was no man with 10 heads. He actually had a Nolakha har. So he had a garland with 9 jewels, and his head would reflect on these jewels 9. So 9 plus 1, 10 heads. So people would say, 10-headed Ravan. But it is a way of saying. So now this is the Jain version. So they are rationalizing. So the Jains look at it very differently. So the Ramayana of Jainism is, they say Ram is a Baladev, who is a pacifist. And his brother Lakshman, who has a high temper, is a Vasudeva, who is very violent, and their enemy, the Prati Vasudeva, is Ravan. The same story is told, but in a different framework.
Very interesting.
right? So now when we talk about Mahabharata, in the Hindus will talk about Mahabharata and Vyasa's Mahabharata, they will say Pandavas fought the Kauravas and Krishna helped the Pandavas. But the Jains will say the Mahabharata actually was a war between Jarasandha and Krishna. Jarasandha, who lived in Bihar area, and Krishna, who was forced to leave Mathura and who migrated to Gujarat, that is Dwarka, and there was a war between these two parties on the eastern and western fronts of India, and the Pandavas helped Krishna.
Amazing. And also, I think in the Ramayana, in the Jain Ramayana, Lakshman kills
Ravan. So Lakshman is the Vasudev, so he is violent. And therefore he'll kill Ravan. In fact, there is a very famous story of a Hindu king gets very upset when he hears this, and he challenges the Jain Muni and tells the Jain Muni, how can you say that Ravan was killed by Lakshman, because I have heard Ram killed Ravan, and how can you say Lakshman killed Ravan? Now the Muni realizes the king is very angry, so he tells, you know what, युग बहुत होते हैं और हर युग में एक राम आता है. So, as the world keeps changing, Ram keeps coming on earth again and again and again. In some times he's killed, he kills Ravan, sometimes his brother kills Ravan. So, I have got one version of the Ramayana, you have got another version of the Ramayana. See, this is Samvad, not Vivad. And the king says, oh, that's a nice, now I have two stories instead of one.
Coming to Ahimsa, non-violence, one of the central concepts of Jainism. But can you explain the concept of Ahimsa in Jainism? Because I read and it said in your book that it's outgrowing the root cause of violence.
Yeah. So nowadays what has happened is Ahimsa is reduced to being vegetarian. Okay. So I always tell people, Acha, so you are vegetarian but you beat up everybody around you, you are like a gunda but you are a vegetarian. Is it okay? But what is violence? Why do we become violent? Why is there violence in nature? We have to ask this fundamental question. In nature, violence is an outcome of hunger. Now, can you give up hunger? The day you give up hunger, you are truly non-violent. How do you give up hunger? So the Jain said, practice fasting. But really they are not talking about physical fasting, they are also talking about emotional fasting. Like don't see your cell phone, don't see your, whatever is giving you an addiction. It will make you want more and more and more and more of it, and then you will get into a violent space. And that why Ahimsa is explained through fasting. If you use the word hunger, it is so simple that you start solving a lot of problems. I think Jainism talks about it. Okay. There's a very famous story of Mahavir where he's sitting and doing tapasya, and one man comes and tells him, where are my cows? No, he's meditating, so he's not seen any cows, so he's just sitting like this and not responding. After some time, the man comes back and he finds the cows wandering around. He said, hey, the cows are here. Why didn't you tell me? And Mahavir is in a state of meditation. He's not knowing what is going on. But this man has first come and accused him of theft. He's accused him of everything. It's so angry, he takes thorns from the ground and he puts in his ears and he starts piercing it. And Mahavir doesn't say, oh, why are you doing it? Doesn't cry out in pain. He just accepts it. Yes. So he says that, I don't know why this man is doing it. I have not hurt him. But he obviously is hurt by me for some imaginary reason and doesn't respond to it. Now these are all signs, these are all very higher levels of Ahimsa.
Yes. So just not responding, right?
Just not responding, not being angry. So you can you can not respond but be burning inside like a volcano.
I like that you said that, people have reduced the concept of Ahimsa or non-violence to vegetarianism, but it's not that at all. It's overcoming the root cause of it. Yeah. That's why this emphasis on fasting. But I want to come to the concept of karma, right? I was reading that chapter in your book. It's very interesting that you say in Jainism, the concept of rebirth and karma differs from Buddhism and Hinduism because accumulated good karmas doesn't ensure enlightenment in Jainism. It's not such a simple cause-effect relationship or calculation in Jainism. So can you explain a bit? I know you started the conversation with karma.
So you see, when you read the Jatak tales in Buddhism it's very clear. If you do good things, it's like a balance sheet. You will keep getting punya, 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 punya. It works in your favor. You have got all positive things happening, and all that will help you become the Buddha. And so it builds up. Jainism says no. Ultimately, you have to work. In the shram karna padega. So there is no correlation between your past life and your present life and your effort. So you find the idea of rebirth is also very complicated. And then of course both Buddhism and Jainism don't have a god who will come and give you enlightenment. Buddhist is very clear algorithmic. I call it tit for tat karma. अच्छा करोगे तो अच्छा मिलेगा, बुरा करोगे तो बुरा करेंगे. There is no such guarantees. And in many ways in Hinduism also they say that. You remember in the Mahabharata, you have Krishna who fights for dharma. In the end, what happens to Krishna? He gets a curse from Gandhari, who tells your children will die. So whenever people say I want to fight for dharma, I'll say okay, you will get Gandhari's curse. Gandhari ka shrap milega. And then they're like, oh, I said Krishna got it right. And when Ram kills Ravan and Ram kills Vali, Ravan's widow Mandodari curses him that you will never have a happy married life. So both Ram and Krishna are cursed, but didn't they do dharma?
But somewhere it may have come from some action. They did dharma, but some of their actions, they had to pay for, right?
So dharma is not karma.
Dharma is not karma. Interesting. But you've also said that, okay, in Jainism you cannot control the sowing of karmic seeds, which you just explained. But the only thing in your control is to burn karmic burden through restraint and austerity and generosity. But that's fairly similar also to Hinduism and yoga, right?
See, it's similar to every religion.
Right.
In Islam also there is be generous. In Christianity also it's be generous. Because it's difficult for human beings to do. So everybody is telling you to be generous.
True.
Question is, why are you being generous? Are you being generous because, hey, if I do something, something will come to me, so then it's calculation.
Your method of research, how long did it take you to do your research and your sources?
So I do multiple research. These are my books. Like this is like
Right.
what, not even 10% of my books. Right? I write about 4 books a year. I write about 200 articles a year. So, and I do it all the time. So I'm researching all the time. Like right now I'll have 4 books I'm reading, which might turn into a book 4 years later, 5 years later. So I have been reading Jainism for the last 20 years. My main work is storytelling.
Yes.
So I will compile the story and keep it in my head somewhere in the corner of my mind. And at the right occasion I'll pull it out, like, it's like Ali Baba's cave. I spend about 3-4 hours every day researching.
3-4 hours.
Yeah, and 3-4 hours writing. So input, output.
Amazing. Can you give us lastly 3 mantras for success for budding authors?
I will use the Jain principles of Anekantvad. Listen to other people. Most people are too busy writing, but they're not checking whether others want to read their writing. So that's the first rule I'll always say. Anekantvad. Listen from other people's point of view. Then aparigraha. Don't cling on, when you write something, let it go. People may not like it, edit it. People find it very difficult to edit. They feel, मैंने ये 10 sentences लिखे हैं, perfect है. And when an editor comes and says, no, this can all be said in 3 lines. And then they feel so bad. So that's attachment. So aparigraha, let it go. And then comes, the violence, ahimsa. Why do you really want to write? Is it coming from, you're hungry for something, right? Are you hungry for fame? Are you coming from fear? That you will, if you don't write a book, nobody will recognize you, nobody will think you're an intellectual. Is it coming from curiosity? Why do you have this burning desire to write? And they'll say, नहीं sir, वो writer को बहुत respect मिलता है. तो सर हाँ, लेकिन तुम क्यों लिखना चाहते हो? Because respect के लिए कई बहुत चीज कर सकते हो. Ask yourself, तुम्हारा ये हिंसा कहाँ से आ रहा है? So ahimsa, aparigraha, anekantvad. 3 mantras for anything in life.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much, Devdutt. That was a very fascinating discussion. I learned a lot, and I learned a lot from your book.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Definitely an episode to watch for mythology enthusiasts, and keep watching Buzz by the Bay for more such exciting discussions.